Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
As we do every Thursday, we jump into the time machine for Throwback Thursday. And this week, we listen back to my conversation with maybe the most memorable Texans backup quarterback. And without question, the most talented. 3 years ago, I sat down with Sage Rosenfels. And oh yes, we'll get into the infamous Rosencopter game. But I also asked Rosenfels about his memories of Andre Johnson, Gary Kubiak, and Matt Schaub. Sage also crossed paths with a litany of legendary players and coaches over a 12-year NFL career, including the likes of Nick Saban, Marty Schottenheimer, Wes Welker, and Junior Seau. So without further ado, let's jump into the time machine and listen to some stories from Texans quarterback Sage Rosenfels. Now, when you were an unrestricted free agent back in 2006, just take us back a little bit. How did you end up signing with Houston? What do you remember about that?
Well, I just spent the last 4 years of my career. My first year was in Washington, and I spent 4 years in Miami. And the last of those 4 years was under Nick Saban. Actually, at the time, Jason Garrett was my quarterbacks coach, and Scott Linehan was my offensive coordinator. Obviously, both those two are in Dallas, the last number of years here. So I was a free agent, and it was really the first time that I really felt like I had played some. I played a decent amount in that 2005 season in Miami and played fairly well. So I was excited for free agency. And Houston was the, sort of hands down, the team that was the most interested, from one just a financial standpoint. But, they showed, how much they really wanted me to come in and sort of compete with David Carr. And I think Kubiak really liked my athleticism. And those types of things that he really liked in a quarterback, because at that time he was coming from obviously the Denver Broncos and Jake Plummer and a lot of bootleg in their scheme, and he saw that I could do some of that stuff. So Houston was my first and only visit. I had 3 or 4 lined up, but Houston just felt right to me, and Gary Kubiak felt like just the right coach to play for. And I did my research as well. I went back and I talked to guys who had played for Gary Kubiak, guys like Brian Griese, who really recommended that he'd be a great guy to play for, and that his scheme was very conducive to having success as an NFL quarterback.
There was never any debate about Kubiak as an offensive mind, but I was curious how it seemed he made life easier for quarterbacks. Can you explain maybe some of the things that he did that really benefited quarterbacks? And what did you think of Gary as an offensive coordinator and as an offensive mind? Because you played with Norv Turner, one of the all-time greats, when you were a rookie in Washington.
Yeah, I was lucky enough over the course of my career to play with some fantastic offensive minds. And you mentioned Norv Turner, but with him was Mike Shula, who has been the Carolina OC the last number of years. Mark Trestman. I also played for, and obviously, Jason Garrett and Scott Linehan. And so, what Kubiak does really, really well is he doesn't, put the entire offense on the quarterback's, hands in a sense. He's not forcing the quarterback to control the offensive line and all these types of things. He gives you a sort of a very precise black and white set of rules to follow it and to live by that put you in the best possible, position to be successful. And, one of the best things that he does from a passing game standpoint is that he tries to draw up pass plays that, somebody within the 5 positions, the receivers, the tight ends, and the running backs, somebody within those positions does have some sort of one-on-one matchup. They can't double everybody. So he creates these concepts and these diagrams and formations and things like that allows you to go out and get completions and find those one-on-one matchups. And he doesn't force you to, rig the protections and tell the line everything what to do like some other offenses do. So it really allows a young quarterback to have success, to go out there and just play, do what you're told sort of, and go through your reads with your footwork and find completions. And, you do find over the years that he has coached. I mean, just this year, Trevor Siemian, a 7th-round draft pick for the Denver Broncos 2 years ago, no experience last year, then this past year gets his first chance as a 7th-round pick. Doesn't have a crazy great year, but does go 9-6 as a starter, and obviously played very well for what most teams would probably have as a second or even third string quarterback.
When you signed with Houston, you started when Kubiak started. Owen Daniels was in that draft, so you started with him in Houston. What did it mean when you saw these guys win the Super Bowl with the Broncos? Was there an extra set of emotion for you?
Yeah, I was, very excited for those players. That draft, and I'm sure Texans fans will remember that 2006 draft. Really, looking back, there was a lot of controversy because they didn't draft, Vince Young or Reggie Bush, like a lot of fans, had hoped, and they went with Mario Williams. And, Mario really did end up being probably the best player of those three, and is still playing at a fairly high level down there now in Miami. But, the other players in that draft were very, very good. We had 2 third-rounders, Eric Winston, who's still playing in the NFL. Our other third-rounder, Charles Spencer, I think would be playing in the NFL if he didn't have a catastrophic knee injury in one of the first games of that season. And then as we go down the line, as you said, guys like Owen Daniels and David Anderson, and I'm sure a few other players I'm forgetting, end up having really nice careers from that draft. Owen Daniels was a fantastic tight end. I think probably the easiest tight end for a quarterback to throw to. Every tight end is a little different. And Owen wasn't a guy who could go up as 6'5" and jump over people. But he had a great feel for defenses, great feel for timing. He had played quarterback, coming into Wisconsin, so he had a feel for what the quarterback sort of had to go through, and I think that helped the way he ran routes and the way he was after the catch. I mean, he was just a very, very good tight end and had a great NFL career.
I want to remind our listeners, because they might not remember this, you were 4-1 as a starter in 2007 when the Texans were 8-8 that season. Great completion percentage. I thought of you as a guy who could definitely make plays as a quarterback. What trait or traits was the difference, do you think, between you being a starting NFL QB and a backup? I know here in Houston, interceptions were at times a problem for you, right?
Yeah, you could probably say I was probably a little bit too inconsistent, to be a starter. And as you sort of saw between the 2007 and 2008 year, I did not play as well in 2008, and I threw too many interceptions. And I was one of those quarterbacks that I don't want to call myself a street quarterback, but I tried to make things happen. I think as a backup, as a second, third string guy, you're always trying to sort of, whether it's the word is impress, you're always trying to show something that you can make that throw, that you can make that play, and that you should be on the roster. I came up as a third string guy, just barely on the team for my first 4 years in the NFL. So I was always trying to prove that I was good enough to be an NFL quarterback. And so, once I became the guy who was playing a lot, it's hard to turn that off, that aggressiveness as a quarterback. So, occasionally I was too inconsistent and threw too many interceptions. I sort of relate myself to sort of how Matt Moore is, who was the backup in Miami this year. He's a guy who can come in and throw 3 touchdown passes in the game, but he also is a guy that when he's not, playing great, can also throw 3 interceptions in the game, and I guess that's sort of how my career was.
Well, let me get to this thing, and I'm going to get it out of the way. Your least favorite word in the English language, and one of the most famous words in Texans history, it's Rosencopter. And I checked Twitter on Sunday, Sage, and I see you post during the Falcons championship game, "Welcome to the Helicopter Club, Julio." What do you remember about that Colts game? And I'll just remind everybody that you were starting. You had the Texans up by 27-10 score. Colts, they would score a TD with about 4 minutes left to get within 10. And then the infamous play. What do you remember about that whole thing?
Well, we could probably go back and do an entire podcast, on that game, on that play, the entire day. I mean, there's a lot that, of course, I remember about it. And I will say, and I think people who do follow me on Twitter do recognize that I don't mind making fun of myself. It is something that happened in my life. It's not something that I'm ashamed of. I decided to go for it, and it backfired. And again, sort of going back to what I said before, as a backup third string guy, your natural predisposition is not to slide. Sort of sliding's for the wimps, sliding's for the starters who are making $20 million a year. I'm trying to earn my stripes out here, earn respect to my teammates, and I decided to go for it, and obviously it backfired. So I mean, there's a lot of things I can remember about that day. I mean, Matt Schaub was supposed to be the starter, obviously. He got ill in the middle of the night with some sort of flu or something. I came down to breakfast at 8:00, and I was told that I'm probably going to start, that Schaub is really sick. So end up starting that day. I believe we were 0-3 at the time going into the game. I probably played the best game of my life up to that point, through the first 56 minutes of that football game. And as you said, the Colts scored to bring them within 10. There was 4.5 minutes left, something like that. And they onside, and we got the onside. And we had about a third and, if I recall, about a 3rd and 7 situation. And Kubiak called a bootleg out of sort of a heavy tight end package. And you're expecting us probably just to run the football and punt the ball on 3rd down and back up Peyton Manning inside his own 10-yard line. But he called a pass play, and to be honest with you, I was like, man, I wish we'd just run the football here. But okay, let's do this thing. And I came around that left end, and all I saw was green grass, and no one was there. And I was like, I can run for this first down. My natural thought when I went to the line was, if I can run, I'm going to run. I want to keep that clock moving. So even if I don't get a first down, the clock will keep moving for another 35 or 40 seconds. And so as I was running and coming around the bend there, and once I made that decision to run for the first down, I can't remember what player it was. I think his name was Marlon Jackson, was a cornerback who was covering Owen Daniels on that play. He actually came off Owen once I sort of tucked the ball and let him go. And I think Owen ended up being pretty much wide open and came up, to make the tackle. And rather than, of course, trying to juke him, which really wasn't part of my skill set, I decided to jump over him, which was obviously a bad idea. And didn't see Dwight Freeney and another defensive lineman, chasing me from behind, and it would end up being the infamous Rosencopter. So, at this point, I and not long after that, probably that following off season, I said, I decided to go for it. Things didn't work out, but what I can teach my kids and my son and my daughters in life is that I'd always rather have you go for it, because sometimes you fail. But people that don't go for it never accomplish anything. So I'm happy I went for it. I wish I would have just hung on to the football.
How long did it take you to have a sense of humor about the whole thing?
It took me a while. I mean, I will say that that play, that was that 2008 season where I did not play as well as the 2007 season, which I went 4-1. And that play did have an effect on me the rest of the year. I felt tentative. I felt cautious. I felt like I was going to screw it up. We were playing the Cleveland Browns later on that season in nasty weather, and we were in a sort of a similar situation, and I just wanted to hand the ball off. I was sort of, my mindset wasn't the regular aggressive quarterback that I'd always had been in the past. We came to the end of that game, we're up by about 10 or so points, and I just wanted to hand the ball off. And again, Kubiak called a pass play and ended up going to Andre Johnson, and Andre was open and ended up hitting him. But I remember at the time, just naturally nervous that something bad was going to happen because of what happened earlier in that season.
Well, people don't think of you as Michael Vick or Steve Young, but from what I read, you actually ran for 140 yards in a game while you were at Iowa State. Do I got that right?
That is correct. You mean, I wasn't, I can't say I was the most athletic quarterback in the world, but, I was a pretty good athlete in high school, played a lot of sports, basketball and track, and I think I ran a 4.72 or something at the combine. So I always thought myself as a pretty decent athlete. And in college at Iowa State, we ran the ball, their fair share. That was the early days of the zone read, which all the teams now do. And so at that time, when we were one of the first teams doing it, it really kept teams off guard, and they weren't sure what to do. So everyone's always tackling the running back, and here I am, running outside, down the numbers, and no one's around me for 15 or 20 yards. That happened a few times that year, and in particular in that Colorado game, which was played in about 6 inches of snow. I think the defense literally just could not move. They were just stuck in their tracks, literally, at certain aspects of that game. So I had a couple of long runs in that game, and ended up being one of my favorite wins in Iowa State, in my Iowa State career.
Well, you mentioned Matt Schaub a little bit earlier, and you came in around the same time he came in, and so just wanted to get your thoughts on what a young Matt Schaub was like. Of course, in a couple of weeks, we're going to see Matt Schaub's going to get a chance to play in a Super Bowl back here in Houston, so that's a little bizarre for Texans fans.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a little different. I came to Houston. David Carr was the quarterback in 2006, and played much better, I believe, than the previous years before I was there and before Kubiak was there, but didn't play up to what Kubiak thought he could be a a franchise quarterback. And so they moved on from him, and obviously they traded a couple second round draft picks for Matt Schaub and gave him a very large contract. And so I was sort of relegated to the number 2 spot again. And, Schaub and I got along well. I thought at the time, and I could tell that he was going to be a good player. He was a very accurate quarterback. He was smart. Again, not a guy that was a great athlete, but in that type of offense, he could do enough to get outside the pocket and the play action. He was very detailed in his work. He was a very good competitor, and teammates respected him. So he ended up having a really, really good career, and it's still going. And this is his first legit shot at winning the Super Bowl title.
Yeah, it's funny. If he wins the Super Bowl title, that'll be the third Texans starter that's won a Super Bowl title. David Carr with the Giants and Tony Banks with the Ravens. Unfortunately, none of them have won one with the Texans. Let me ask you about Andre Johnson. What comes to mind when I say his name?
Andre was just phenomenal. It's been written about, it's been talked about, hundreds and hundreds of times, I'm sure, down there in the Houston media market, on the national media market. I'd never played with a physical receiver like him before, whatever he was, 6'4" and 35 pounds. He was just a physical freak. But the way he was soft-spoken, didn't say a lot, and just went to work every single day. He had his own Friday workouts in the summertime. I think someone labeled as like the hurricane workout or the Canes workout or something like that, which some players showed up for. That was extremely challenging. Andre was not outworked, but he was one of those rare players that was extremely talented and refused to be outworked by anybody. So one of my all-time teammates, the best wide receiver I ever played with in my time in college or the NFL, and in my opinion, should be a Hall of Fame receiver.
How do you overall remember your time in Houston, and maybe tell us a little bit about your impression of the Texans as an organization and how it was run, that sort of thing, because you've played with, was it 3 other teams, I think, the Vikings, the Redskins, and the Dolphins?
Well, in the New York Giants there at the end of my career. So, I think when I look back at my Texans time, I'm filled with a lot of happiness in the fact that was the best I ever played in my NFL career. It's the most I played in my NFL career. I believe that those 3 years sort of solidified the fact that I was a legit NFL quarterback, that I could be respected, around the league, for my quarterback play. I also look back and I wish I would never left Houston. I had a chance to go up to the Minnesota Vikings to compete for a starting job, and Schaub sort of had, he was the starter. He was being paid like the starter, and he was the starting quarterback for the Texans. And so I thought if I could get a better chance to go up there and start in Minnesota on another very good football team with a great running back and Adrian Peterson, I would have loved that opportunity. And I think that was the worst decision that I probably made career-wise in my NFL career. Shouldn't have left a Kubiak system. It was perfect for me. Kyle Shanahan's system. Just the way I knew what I was doing. I knew where all the bones were buried, within that system, and did not play nearly as well anywhere else in my NFL career. So, looking back, hindsight's always 20/20, but looking back, I wish I would never left Houston, but I loved playing for that organization. Really good people in that organization. I liked Kubiak's coaching staff, at that time. But from the owner on down, from Bob McNair on down, I really thought it was a first-class organization. The people upstairs were very personable, and they respected the players. I think the players respected them. It was a very, very good organization from the top down, and I can see why they're consistently, a winning team.
You get drafted by the Redskins out of Iowa State, and you played under Marty Schottenheimer, who I got to cover a little bit when I was in school. We covered a couple of the Chiefs games, and just a guy that's always been one of my favorites. The awful news recently that he has Alzheimer's. What was it like to play for Coach Schottenheimer?
Well, when I first got to Washington and Schottenheimer drafted me, a lot of the veterans were, sort of like, well, we got this Marty guy, he's Marty Ball, and it's old fashioned, and, all these rules, and he's going to be this, hard coach, not player friendly. And for me, I felt like I fit right in perfectly. I mean, that's what I was used to, sort of raised on Midwestern values and hard work and doing the right things. And the coaches do the coaching, the players do the playing, and sort of listen to authority. So I was very much used to that type of atmosphere. Did not bother me at all. Absolutely loved playing for Marty. His son, Brian Schottenheimer, who is now the Indianapolis Colts quarterbacks coach, he was the coach that really drafted me. He came to Iowa State, worked me out. Obviously was impressed enough by the workout that he reported back to Washington that he liked me as a quarterback. So, it was a very good experience. I was only there for a year. The legendary, after Marty got fired after 1 year, we went 0-5, then came back 5-5, ended up the season 8-8, and Marty Schottenheimer got fired. So Steve Spurrier came in. That was quite the experience as well. Went through pretty much all of training camp with Steve Spurrier. Then right at the end of training camp, right before that last preseason game, ended up being traded to the Miami Dolphins.
I don't know if you remember much, if there was like a story like this with Marty, but his enthusiasm, it seemed like it would be infectious. We've seen him on NFL films, but I remember, shooting an interview with Derek Thomas in the locker room when he was with the Chiefs, and Marty walked into the middle of the interview just as we're about to start interviewing Derek Thomas, just to tell Derek Thomas what a great game he played and congratulating him. And I've covered the NFL and other sports. I've never seen a head coach do that and just kind of show that enthusiasm with his players. And, I don't know how much of that was a show with him or how much of that was really Marty.
Well, Marty really believed in the spirit of the athlete and the spirit of the competitor. And sort of the grit that it takes to be successful. He's one of those guys I felt like really appreciated the blue collar, type of football player. I think he understood how hard it was to make it in the NFL, how hard it was to be great, how hard it is to win regularly and continuously. He never quite made it over the top and won a Super Bowl, but the guy was consistently winning a lot of football games, consistently in the playoffs, deep in the playoffs, just couldn't get over the hump. But he was a fantastic football coach. I believe for the most part, when I was there in Washington, we had a couple older guys. I'm not going to name names, but a couple older guys who are Hall of Famers, who didn't really, love the way he coached, because he didn't really care if you were, the 12-year veteran making $7 million a year, or you're the undrafted free agent. He treated everybody pretty much the same. You had to go through all the drills. You had to have all the same rules. And that's just how he believed a team should be set up. So I said, for me, a young player like that, that fit perfectly into what I was used to. And I think he was a fantastic football coach and one of the best coaches I ever played for. And I was very lucky that my rookie year, he was the head coach. I truly believe some of those sort of values that he taught me and that I learned from that season really did help me and carry me to have a long, 12-year NFL career.
Yeah, I might be about to mention those Hall of Famers that you were talking about, but before I ask you about that, the crazy thing about Washington, your QB was Tony Banks, if I remember right, and then you succeeded him as the backup here in Houston. So you guys have kind of crossed paths. He's still broadcaster down here with the Texans. Yeah,
T. Banks. So we had a situation where Jeff George was the starter, a guy named Todd Husak, who had the previous season was a 6th-round draft pick from Stanford. And then myself was a 3rd-string guy. Well, Jeff George missed a lot of training camp. Had a shoulder soreness or something. So Todd Husak got a lot of time as the starter in those first couple preseason games and didn't play very well. And the team was really concerned that, Jeff is injured all year. We don't have a veteran backup. So they ended up basically releasing Husak, bringing in Tony Banks, who had just gotten cut, very surprised cut by the Dallas Cowboys. At that time, this goes, Tony previously had been with the Baltimore Ravens when they won the Super Bowl. So, Tony gets cut by the Dallas Cowboys. We immediately pick him up literally hours later. We sign him and pick him up. And then two weeks into the season, the Washington decides to let go of Jeff George. They were not happy with his performance. They weren't happy with his leadership. And after 2 weeks, they basically fire him and make Tony Banks a starter. And I was the backup. We ended up saying Kent Graham, basically out of retirement, the old sort of New York Giants and Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback. And so it was myself as a young rookie and definitely 2 elder statesmen in the QB room. It was actually a very fun season, a very up and down season. And I was probably again, going back to that 3rd-string quarterback conversation, I was very lucky I didn't play at all that year. I was definitely underprepared and not ready for the NFL game.
Yeah, Grandma, I believe, had a cup of coffee here in Houston also. Let me ask you about, you had future Hall of Famers, Darrell Green, Bruce Smith, Champ Bailey. What do you remember about being around those guys?
That was a very interesting, thing as well. Marty's first meeting, the first team meeting that I ever sat in, of course, I'm going to go in, I'm going to sit in the back because I don't want to take anybody else's seat. So I sort of sit in the far back left corner, and I'm there, 15 minutes early for that meeting. And about 3 minutes before the meeting starts, when everyone's pretty much sat down, Darrell Green walks up to me and says, "Hey, son, you're in my seat." So I had to move. Darrell had been on that team for about 20 seasons, and I just moved, luckily, one over, and that was my really first, experience with Darrell Green, one of the all-time great cornerbacks in NFL history. So, yeah, that team had a lot of talent. That was early Dan Snyder years where he was signing some really highly priced, free agents, around the NFL, older guys. Deion Sanders wasn't on that team, but he was there the previous year. We had a lot of talent, on that football team, and it did take a while, but finally we started playing better and better as the season went on, and again ended up 8-8 at the end of that season. And unfortunately, Snyder was so used to sort of winning, and he felt winning wasn't that hard, I guess, that he let go of Marty Schottenheimer after just one season.
Your next stop is Miami, where you had a pretty interesting cast of characters there, and I just wondered, if you're in the huddle, do you get a word in edgewise when Hall of Famer Chris Carter is in the huddle with you?
Yeah. Well, so Chris, that season, he wasn't originally on the team, and as we went through the year, I believe we were about 5-1. We went to Denver and got a huge win at Denver, and I think it was like a Sunday night football game. And but we had both of our starting receivers get hurt in that football game. Rondé Gadsden got hurt with a wrist injury, pretty much was going to put him out the rest of the year if he was going to have surgery. And Chris Chambers had a terrible concussion in that game. And so we were really in desperate need of a wide receiver. And Chris Carter lived right up the road in Boca Raton. And we ended up signing him. He had been, you could say on the street for the beginning of that season. And I don't even think he was in a training camp. And so we signed Chris. We desperately needed some wide receiver help. And I had a chance to play with another Hall of Famer, again. And, Jason Taylor was also on that Miami team. He's up for the Hall of Fame this year. I think Zach Thomas, though his name's not mentioned, should be at some point in the Hall of Fame. He was just an unbelievable linebacker, a phenomenal middle linebacker. Not that season, but the following season, Junior Seau was on that football team. Obviously, Ricky Williams was our running back those first couple years before he sort of had his hiatus. That first year I was in Miami, he ran for about 850 yards, probably the most impressive individual performance I'd ever seen as an athlete. Ricky was just phenomenal that 2002 season. So, yeah, that Miami team was definitely star-studded as well.
Yeah, you mentioned a guy that I wanted to ask you about, Junior Seau. Do you have a story for Junior?
No, not really. I mean, other than the fact that he pretty much called everybody buddy. I mean, that was pretty much his phrase for everybody on the football team. I think it was a friendly phrase, and two is because there's just no way you can remember everybody's name. And the guy that had been around for that long at that time, I think it was his 13th or 14th season, been through literally thousands of football players. And so he just called everybody buddy. He was very happy-go-lucky, always in sort of a good mood in the locker room, always singing different songs in the locker room, in the training room, and was an excellent teammate. And a guy that in practice absolutely went full speed all the time. I mean, dangerously went full speed all the time. He brought practice up to a whole nother level at that will linebacker position.
I also believe you had a young wide receiver, a little-known guy out of Texas Tech named Wes Welker. Is that right?
That is correct. Let me think. This is 2004, Dave Wanstead's last year as head coach. Norv Turner has now moved on to the Oakland Raiders to be their head coach. And we had a kickoff punt returner. I don't remember his name. The only reason I remember it, or the only reason you remember he exists, is because he was replaced by Wes Welker. The first couple of games of the year, but we lost both those games. He fumbled about 3 or 4 different punts/kickoffs, and we weren't good enough to win games when we're fumbling punt returns. And so we signed Wes Welker as sort of a guy who, listen, you're going to catch the ball on a punt and get 5 yards and get down. And so, first game of the year, he comes out there and boom, right off the bat, like a 19-yard return, then like an 8-yard return, then like a 30-yard return. And he never really worked his way into the wide receiver rotation in that 2004 year. But the next year when Nick Saban came in, he became our third wide receiver. He became our slot wide receiver on that football team. And I remember Nick even saying, we're trying to replace this kid, Wes Welker, but he's so dang good that, all of our nickel, cornerbacks just can't cover him. And so obviously, from that, Wes had an unbelievable NFL career, moving on to New England, putting up some huge numbers there for half a decade or so, then obviously going out to Denver to sort of finish off his career.
Did you have any idea at that time? Could you see it when he first came in?
Well, at that time I would say I didn't understand the NFL game the way I now look back and understand it. I didn't realize at the time. I just remember Pat Surtain saying, who was our All-Pro or Pro Bowl cornerback, who on third down went into the slot and played sort of that nickel will position, which is pretty much all man-to-man, and him saying, I can't cover this kid. And of course, I was one of the quarterbacks running the scout team, and he was correct. I mean, Wes was getting open all the time. He was almost impossible to cover. He brought it on every single route, every single play, and he was just a thorn in the side of the Miami Dolphins cornerbacks, that season. So, I'm not surprised after watching him really beat up on Sam Madison and Pat Surtain, our two Pro Bowl cornerbacks, that he would become a very, very good slot wide receiver in the NFL.
You just mentioned a name that got everybody's attention a few minutes ago, Nick Saban. What was it like working with him and dealing with him on a daily basis?
Well, I really have nothing but good things to say about playing for Coach Saban. I was the third string quarterback going into that 2005 year. Gus Frerotte and A.J. Feely were sort of battling out for the starting spot, and I was the third guy, not getting nearly the same amount of reps as those guys. And, I remember at one point during the summertime, I had a discussion with Jason Garrett, who was our quarterbacks coach. And he said, just make those reps count. At the end of the day, you're going to have a film that says Sage Rosenfels on it, and you're going to have how many plays are on it. We're going to look at that film and you make, whether it's 100 reps at the end of the summer or whether it's 300 reps, we're going to see that film and see how you do. And each quarterback will have their own film. So I just tried to make the most of my opportunities, and I played extremely well, whether it was a summer or during training camp. Played very well in those preseason games. And going into week one, they actually moved me up to be the number 2 quarterback that year ahead of A.J. Feely. And so, I really have nothing but good things to say about Nick Saban. He was extremely hard as a head coach, absolutely. You had to be in just phenomenal shape. I mean, he really whipped you into shape, and practices were long and they were grueling. But I always thought everything sort of made sense about how he did. Everything he did was for a reason. Every drill he did was for a reason. It wasn't just go and hit your head against the wall. I think he enjoyed the science of the game. But he was extremely hard head coach, a physically hard head coach to play for. But if you took care of your own business and you're on time and you did all the right things, I thought in some ways he was an easy coach to play for.
That was former 4th-round pick out of Iowa State, Sage Rosenfels. In his 3 years in Houston, Sage threw 24 touchdowns and 23 interceptions and 453 passing attempts. A little bit of the inconsistency that we talked about in our conversation. He completed 65.6% of his passes. He was a hell of an athlete, though. All-State honorable mention in basketball, in high school, 2-time All-State in baseball, and he even made state on the 4x200 relay in his 1 year in track. Well, I hope you enjoyed our weekly Throwback Thursday podcast. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Don't forget to follow Houston Sports Talk on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Podcast app, or the Stitcher app. You can support us by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or by telling your friends about us. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.